You're listening to Careers and Cocktails, career talk with a twist, hosted by expert recruiter Renee Frey. Let's get this party started.
Hey party people, welcome to Careers and Cocktails. And today I have one of my best friends, phenomenal businessman, attorney turned winemaker, side hustle, making wine, selling it. This is Robert Fowler, and he is the owner of Fowler Ditch LLC, a specialty law firm located in the Twin Cities, dedicated to representing law enforcement officers and public employee union representation. Practice areas for law enforcement include representation of critical incident use force cases, including high media profile officer-involved shootings. Holy smokes, thank God we're friends. Discipline and discharge cases as well. He has 20 years of legal experience in criminal defense, labor law, including grievance and contract arbitration, and 20 years of experience in administrative and civil cases. Currently, his firm provides legal services for approximately 1,000 members in the Minnesota Fraternal Order of Police's legal defense plan. And he also provides public employee representation primarily as a general counsel for the Minnesota Public Employees Association, as well as other independent labor unions and one private sector employee union. Holy smokes, how do you have time to do all that? And he recently started Fowler Wine LLC, a small craft winery in Hudson, Wisconsin. He is currently president of the Twin Cities Purple Foot Winemaking Club and is a wine judge at various wine contests all across the state, as well as the Minnesota State Fair. And as an amateur, he himself has won over 200 medals in wine contests. Is there anything you don't do, Rob?
Well, try to do as much as we can.
Right? So he brought some of his favorite wines to share today, and I'm going to hand it over to him since I'm a total amateur. Tell us, what are we going to be drinking today?
Well, I'm not going to tell you exactly what it is right off the bat. I will tell you it's a red table wine that I made. It's from 2017, and every winemaker I think has their style or their profile that they try to do. So I try to make wines that I like, and the kind of wines that I like are international style wines, or like the high-end, California cabs and things like that. One of my favorite winemaking regions is Bordeaux, France, and so
mine too.
That's one of my, it's a great blend of wine, and so the winemaker can really come through and show, their blend, their style, and whether it's aged in oak, new oak, French oak, American oak, there's all kinds of options to do. So my wine style profile that I like in a wine is I like a red wine that, almost sucks your mouth dry, where,
Me too.
You feel your teeth are getting covered in grit. That's perfect, because that's the tannins in the wine. So I like real complex, robust reds. I don't like the jammy, fruity,
Me either.
Wines. I'm not saying that that's the best wine, but...
Oh, right. Everyone has a different palate.
Right. Everybody has the styles that they like. And the best wine in the world is the wine you like. So if it's not
Absolutely.
Your cup of tea, that's fine.
Absolutely.
But I think people will find that as they drink wine, their palates change. And as you keep having one style over and over, it almost leaves your palate wanting to try something more. And so I started out drinking almost exclusively Italian wines, like Barolo, Brunello, even some good Chiantis or Vino Nobile, because my wife and I went on our honeymoon there, and that's where I ended up discovering wine in the first place. Because before that, Natural Light was fine by me, or Bud Light. So I really didn't have a lot of wine experience before I met my wife. So actually, I do want to credit her with introducing me to wine, because she had some experience in the industry. So I got hooked on wine. At first, I really liked Italian wine, but it changed as I wanted to try and broaden, what's out there. Because wine is, you could drink a bottle of wine every day for the rest of your life and you could still learn something every day.
Absolutely.
There's so much to choose, and there's new wine regions that are getting more acclaim and more discovered, especially after the fall of communism. They've really started to expand their markets too. So it's a lifetime journey, and that's what I really like about wine. And as a winemaker, it's fun to say, the challenge is, I just had some really great wine. Can I make that? Can I do something like that? And that's the fun for me. That's what I geek out on, and I really enjoy the techniques that you can use to try to. Ultimately, you have to start with a good product. So finding a good source of grapes is number one, because if you get a bad starting product, you're not going to make fabulous wine at all, and no matter how good of a winemaker you are. So luckily, I have had. I usually get most of my grapes from the same places, and so I've worked with actual wineries in California that we've imported grapes for a number of years in Washington, and here locally too. I use the same growers all the time. So
awesome. So tell us. So I'm a huge Riedel fan because I love glassware, and that's what we're drinking out of. But tell me the story behind your Fowler emblem label here on the front here of the glass.
Yeah, that's a good story, actually. My wife is a graphic designer. That's what her training is, and
she made the Talent Q logo, by the way.
Yes, that's true.
Which is phenomenal.
Yeah. So my wife and I had talked for a number of years about maybe starting a winery, and we were in Minnesota at the time, and the laws are a little different there. So we moved here to Wisconsin, and over this time I'm giving away my wine because you can't sell any homemade wine, and I never have, never will. But so we started, kind of developing. People say, well, what do you call your wine? I really didn't have a name for it, but people always say, well, I want some Fowler wine. So that's what stuck. So Fowler wine is what it is. And so my last name is Fowler, which is a bird hunter, Fowler, bird hunter. Yeah. So we came up with I literally scratched it out on a napkin for Nyla and said, hey, I was thinking like maybe some hunter dude, with a hunting vest, like a silhouette. And so I sketched this out, and she, of course, put it on the computer and embellished it. And I had a little hunting hat with the ear flaps, is what the top of it is. But it's funny because so many people have told me, I want some of that duck label wine because it looks like a duck.
Oh, that's funny.
Which is cool, too, because that's Fowler, and so it all relates anyway, but it was totally unintentional.
Right. But didn't she win an award for this, too?
That's right, yeah. So Winemaker magazine is the largest amateur wine publication in the United States.
Oh, I didn't know it was amateur.
It is an amateur publication, but
awesome.
it's the largest amateur winemaking publication in the world, and it's got a real good following. Everybody, even professional wineries, I think will subscribe to it because it's interesting. So they have an annual label contest, and so she won in 2012 the grand prize for this label, and we actually submitted it on the bottle. So it was a white background with the colors. Obviously aren't showing on the etched wine glass, but it's blaze orange is the colors. And again, since the hunting theme, I thought the blaze orange would be cool. And the gun is kind of a gunmetal gray, and then the letters are black. But so that's how our logo came about. And she actually just revamped it a little bit so that when we get the website up and running, and we have to have all our labels approved by the federal government. And so there's a process.
Fascinating! You have to have them approved.
Yep, there's and you can do it online or you can send it the old-fashioned way. But so every label that's on alcohol has to be approved.
Wow.
And that's why when the government shutdown was going on, no beer manufacturers, winemakers could get their labels approved during that time period. So it was like a major big deal because no new brands could come out because nobody was manning the ship. So that was a big deal. So I was actually happy to see a budget deal reach because now I know I can get my labels in.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So
we're drinking a secret wine.
Well, I don't want to tell you what it is right away. I will tell you eventually. But
okay.
If you want to. So like I said, I like full-bodied reds. I like oaky aroma on the nose because I prefer French oak barrels. The wood is aged longer. The French have rules on everything.
Oh yeah.
So their wood has to be aged outside at certain temperatures for a certain number of years, all that stuff. And so I really like the French oak. It imparts not an overbearing oak flavor or aroma, but it really makes the wine, I think, better than if it was just a fruit character. A lot of people take the fruit character literally in the wine. It still comes through, but to me, there's nothing better than opening up the bung on a barrel and sticking your nose in it as it's maturing, and that smell is really awesome. It's one of my favorite smells in the world. But so this wine has been aged. This is 2017. I actually just bottled this about a week ago. So it's been 2 years in barrel, and it's got a lot of tannins. It's about 14% alcohol.
It smells delicious. So I have to guess what it is.
Well, I thought it might be fun to see if you can nail it or not.
Nebbiolo?
Nope, not quite.
You want the grape. It's delicious.
Well, I will tell you that I brought this one in particular because it's not a popular wine style. It's not something that people grab right away. And the reason I brought this one is if a winemaker makes the wine in the style they want, sometimes they can cross preconceived notions of what wine types it is. So I'll cut to the chase.
Yeah, tell me what it is.
So this is Merlot, believe it or not.
Shut up.
Yeah, and Merlot, a lot of wineries, it's an easy grow.
Great Merlot.
Well, thanks. It's an easy growing grape, and it's usually used to blend with higher quality grapes like Cabernet Sauvignon or Malbec are some of the examples. But if you make Merlot in a complex style with the proper barrel aging, it can be a really fabulous wine.
Right, because I think of Merlot is on the bottom of my list.
And I think most people think that. And that's the main reason why I brought this, is to show that with some good technique and really trying to craft the wine with the way you want and the style you want, you can actually make better than expectations. Let's just say.
Oh, it's still. I would have never thought that was a Merlot.
Well, then I succeeded in my mission.
It's delicious. So, Rob, is there anything we can celebrate with you this week?
Well, yeah. Actually, this week I just got my Wisconsin Winery Permit.
Cheers!
That was yesterday, as a matter of fact, and it was 2 months. There's a lot of paperwork and legal stuff you got to do to get a winery, and so we started applying almost exactly 2 months ago, and we had to do the federal government's with the TTB to get the federal approval and inspection. And
I can't even. It sounds so laborious.
Well, luckily with my law background, the paperwork wasn't that hard, but it's just a lot of
cake for Rob.
It's just a lot of waiting, and a lot of anxiety and stress goes into that, because you're like, well, what if I didn't do this right? And plus, we had to build the whole winery this summer, so I started on that in June. So that for a month or so, we were pretty heavy into just getting it to be ready for that sort of inspection. And I had a lot of friends helping me out, which I thanked numerous times on Facebook, and good winemakers themselves, actually. So it was a lot of fun to do, but then we had to get the federal paperwork in, then the state of Wisconsin. I had to get a local building permit.
Oh, wow.
From the township, because I'm technically in the township of Hudson, and then St. Croix County Food and Public Health Department had to come and inspect, and had
Who
to get
knew? Everyone's got to check it out.
And it was lots of applications, retailer's permit, food, all this stuff.
Sure.
So
awesome. Congratulations.
Thanks. It was a relief to get yesterday. I knew it was probably going to happen, but it was just like, I have grapes coming in this weekend, so I was like, hurry up and get here, because I need them.
Right.
I need that permit so I can ferment them.
You got to make this wine. So pretend I'm a kindergarten. Explain to me what you do for a living.
Well, I would say that since we just started Fowler Wine, I'll talk more about my law background. So basically, I represent the police when they need help. So law enforcement is a really demanding, dangerous job with a lot of nuances that I don't think many in the public really understand. I mean, people know that a policeman is somebody who's going to help you or whatever, but just it's a lot more complex than that. And sometimes they have to use deadly force, if somebody's going to shoot them or stab them, and these things happen. And so when those bad situations happen, they call our law firm, and we're part of an organization. I represent an organization called the Fraternal Order of Police, and they're the largest police union in the United States, 330,000 plus members nationwide. So every state has their chapter, so I represent the state's chapter, and we run a legal defense plan so that when the officers are involved in a critical incident or get in trouble, need help, whatever the case may be, that they call our firm, and we're obligated to respond and help them. So that's a big part of what we do. The other big piece of what we do is on the more civil side, on the contract bargaining for the labor unions. So police in Minnesota can be unionized, and almost all of them are. So I represent the Minnesota Public Employees Association, which is a newer labor union. They were founded in 2011, and I've been their counsel since.
Awesome.
So what we do is if there's disputes with the employer and the employee, we handle their grievances, contract disputes, contract formation, bargaining. and just handle the issues with their employment side. So
Cool. So how do you remain? Do you get frantic phone calls? I assume.
Oh yeah.
You get frantic phone. How do you stay calm when you're on the other end of the line?
Well, I've had other people working for me in the past, and it's hard to get some of those calls because you're dealing with somebody who is can be upset, can be injured. I've literally done statements in a hospital where an officer's been shot.
Oh my.
So yeah, there's all kinds of things, but luckily I've been at this for 20 years, and while there are new cases that come up that are different, not much phases me anymore. So
Sure.
I'm kind of used to it. But for a newbie, it can be a little bit of a culture shock because police have their own culture and ways of doing things, and
Right.
and they're very matter of fact, and but they can be emotional too, and no officer wakes up on any given day wanting to shoot somebody.
Right.
It is like the last thing they want to have
Of
happen,
course.
and it's not a good outcome, even if they're not at fault, which is very, very, very rare in my state. So
Right. So what did you want to be when you grew up? Did you want to represent the policemen?
not at all. No, I actually wanted to be an engineer. I wanted to be a mechanical engineer. So when I was a teenager in high school, I went to all these engineering camps and all this dorky stuff.
Me too.
I played sports too, so it was full time then, and even as a high school student, it seemed like I didn't have much free time. So, but yeah, so I want to be an engineer. So I thought, well, what's some good engineering schools? Well, MIT is the best. So
Absolutely.
let's shoot there, right? So, but actually, that wasn't always my plan. I was fortunate when I was in high school to have just a random visit from a guy named Tom Cummings who ran basically a consortium to try to help. I don't know if at risk is the right word, but kids that maybe wouldn't have known or had the opportunity to get into some of these good colleges. That was his whole organization's their mission.
Sure.
And so I ran into this guy, and I told him, I was like, well, I think I'll go to like ITT or Iowa State or something. He's like, I think you ought to broaden your horizons. And so he hooked me up with all sorts of strategies to get into college, to do test taking and engineering camps, things like that.
Awesome.
So if I wasn't at school that day, or if he didn't stop in, it probably wouldn't happen. So it was just a fortunate twist.
But now you went to MIT. Didn't you study political science?
Yeah, I did.
So how did you transition?
Well, I think as an 18-year-old or a young adult, you don't know what you
Right. I wanted to be a mechanical engineer too. I started at the U of M, and then after a year, I was like, I'm out of here, and I'm changing. I'm like, just because I'm good at math and science in high school doesn't mean I want to be an engineer.
Well, so I was fortunate to be in a fraternity, and so I started watching what some of the older graduates were doing in engineering. I was like, I really don't think I'm going to like that job. I mean, they were telling their stories about what their project they're working on. Like this one guy had, I don't know, it was some electronics assembly type thing, and I'm like, so you're going to work on this project for 5 years with the same 4 people? Well, what if you don't like the project, or what if you don't like the people? This is not going to work for me. I'm not going to be able to do this.
Same.
So I basically, and plus, I'll be honest, MIT was a very challenging institution, and at some point the math was going to get too complex for me. So I figured out by year 2 that, political science sounds good, and maybe we'll figure out what to do. I had an internship in Congress. I didn't even know that I wanted to be a lawyer yet. And so I was getting closer to graduation, and my mom's like, well, what are you going to do for a job? I said, that's a good question. I don't know. So we talked about going to law school, and that seemed to make the most sense. So moved back to Minnesota from Boston, and the rest is history. But
Right. So small town Iowa boy goes to Boston. How did you transition to Boston?
Well, so I grew up in Sioux City, Iowa, which I tell people, if you're not familiar with Sioux City, it's kind of like Superior, Wisconsin without the ambiance of the lake. It's a great place. It's a very small Midwestern town. I think at the time it was 75,000, and but there's nothing for like 200 miles around Sioux City. So that's your world. And I was ready to move on. Sioux City. The type of jobs I would have wanted wouldn't have been there. So to me, it was logical I had to leave. And I was interested in exploring worlds. So for me, getting to Boston was like, woohoo, we're out of here.
Awesome.
But it was a little bit of a culture shock. I met people from all different faiths and all different backgrounds, and because Sioux City is very, very homogenous. I mean, it's a small Midwestern town. So it was a great opportunity, and lots of cool industries were out there. Sports teams, I didn't have any sports teams growing up in Iowa, so I adopted all the Boston teams since '96. So been a Patriots fan a long time.
Awesome. I love it. So then you went to law school, U of M. I know you worked for a law firm to start, and then you started your own firm. Tell me, what was your why, and how did you take the leap?
Well, it was a really interesting time. So, first of all, I think starting your own business right out of the gate is probably not a good idea. So if you get out of college, probably not a good idea. I mean, I think most people will gain valuable experience working in the field for somebody else for a while.
Yeah.
And so I did that. I worked for a small, more mid-sized law firm in downtown St. Paul. It was called Kelly and Fawcett back then. And Pat Kelly was kind of my mentor, and we got along great. And for about 5 years, then I was learning the union trade and what to doing the representation for the unions. And because I had a criminal law background, because I initially was a prosecutor, then I started doing the police stuff. So that's how I kind of got trained in that, was using the criminal law background, which is needed in those shooting cases and use of force cases. So it was kind of an interesting story. One of the partners, which I won't name, but was having some troubles and was in the paper on some issues. And what did it for me was, I was outperforming the bonus schedule, and then it was a question of whether it was going to be paid. And I was like, you know what, I'm not going to deal with this headache. I want to do this for myself.
Right.
Because if I can perform at this level, I feel I could do it on my own.
Absolutely.
So yeah, it was hard to leave Patrick, because I still think he's a great guy, but the situation was not good, and it just seemed to me that, plus I was doing most of the work for the Fraternal Order of Police back then, and they knew me, and so when I left, they actually came with. It took them a little bit because they had to vote and do, but I was pretty sure that right away I was going to bring them along board.
That's awesome.
And without that, it would have been a difficult transition. But,
sure.
My wife and I were talking. We weren't even married at the time, and she's like, you should get off the sinking ship rather than cling to it. I said, you're probably right.
Right. So what advice do you have on people who want to start their own business? Like, what are the essentials you have to have in place from a legal perspective? Like, when I started Talent Q, I remember I needed to get an employee handbook. I had to have some non-competes. I had some specific legal documentation, dress code, all that stuff,
Well, it's not just the legal. So there's a couple of things. You have to do some planning. You have to plan your exit like I did. I cashed in a small pension to float the boat until we got everything up and running. So you have to have some financial planning that goes into it. You have to be, ready to take on risk.
Absolutely.
If you're not a risk taker, then being your own business owner is probably not the right thing for you. But there's just a lot of planning. Almost everything I've done is taking meticulous planning. It's not something you can make a decision on and wake up the next day and do. You have to plan ahead.
Right.
So from the legal then, it depends on which state you're in. Some of the requirements, you should decide whether you're going to be a sole proprietor, an LLC, a corporation. Most people, the LLC is the best option for the limited liability component, but that varies state to state. Employee handbooks are good, even if you're a small employer, 2 or 3 employees. You should have an employee handbook.
What types of things should people have included in that handbook?
Well, there's a lot, and then we could probably have a whole session on employee relations. But the main thing is set out your firm's expectations. The job rules, what the vacation benefits are going to be, clearly state that kind of thing. Also, you should make sure that you state, if you're an employer, you probably want to keep the at-will relationship as long as possible, unless you're in a certain industry where contracts are common. But creating situations where what's the grounds for discharge, what's the expectations. There's a lot of things that employee handbook can cover, and some will have things like non-competes or non-disclosures, things like that.
Mm-hmm.
It just depends on your industry, what field you're in, what you need, and that's why number one piece of advice is talk to a law firm that does employee relations, that does employment law in particular. So that's a good thing. I mean, for probably under $1,000 consult, you can get all the information that you might need to set that up, so you don't have a big legal bill later when a dispute arises or something.
Sure.
And if you have partners or other people and it's not sole proprietorship, you're going to have member control agreements. You're going to have things that talk about your bylaws and all the different things that you need. So there's a lot that goes into it.
Yeah, exactly. Have it in place before shit happens, is what I say. We touched on non-competes, and you've helped me through one before. When I left a company that I was working for, I was a top performer, and I went to a competing company, and I had signed a non-compete. And I lived in the state of Minnesota, and they were withholding my commissions at the time. And so I called my buddy Rob, and he helped me with a little posturing with letters back and forth, and they paid me every penny, and they backed away. But I did leave with the intention of not going after my existing client base because I was respectful of that. However, how valid are non-competes? And, we get this question a lot. So,
Right. Well, the answer I can tell you is this. At least speaking for Minnesota, I realize we're sitting in Wisconsin,
yeah.
but at least in Minnesota, non-competes are generally viewed as not favored by the courts. So if there's a dispute involving a non-compete and you're trying to enforce a non-compete, the courts are probably going to look at you with a little bit funny face, and because they're not generally favored. The courts in Minnesota favor free competition, as do I. But so anyways, so with a non-compete, in order to be valid, when you get hired, you're supposed to give separate consideration, meaning money is typically what consideration, although it can be a promise or some sort of future exchange or whatever. But basically, you have to say, I'm paying you compensation to be in this contract for the non-compete. So if you just say to a person, hey, you're going to come work for me and sign this non-compete, that ain't going to be valid.
Right. And that's what I did. Here's the stack of onboarding paperwork, sign all this, Renee, and that's what I did.
Right. So normally, to be effective, you're going to want to say, here's a $500 bonus for this non-compete. And it really should be a transaction that is fair and equal in terms of the bargaining power, which, as you just kind of implied, if you're just sitting there with a bunch of papers in front of you,
right.
You really don't have a choice. It's like you're going to take the job for that package or not. So
right.
That's generally why a lot of non-competes are not generally considered valid, because they don't go through that extra consideration step. But if they are valid, they are enforceable. So you have to read the document carefully, because sometimes it'll be too broad, and then the courts will say, it's too broad. You got to be able to have a job.
Right.
But if it's specific to industries and say, hey, you can't go after this region of this type of sales, or what, it can be very specific. So definitely it can be enforceable.
Sure. So do you have any tips for people who experience harassment in the workplace?
Well, yes, and I get lots of calls on harassment or hostile work environments, as it's called.
Hostile work environment.
Right. Now, so generally, before I get into the what to do in the harassment, so a hostile work environment is actually not a correct name. So a lot of work environments are hostile. I mean, that's
a lot of them are shitty too.
Almost every police department I deal with is a hostile work environment. It's actually a discriminatory work environment. It would be the proper name for it. So if you are in a protected class of your sex, race, orientation, things like that, and you are being discriminated against and harassed because of those, then that is what really constitutes a hostile work environment. But of course, there's harassment too. Sexual harassment, gender discrimination. All these things can happen. The number one thing I would say first is to document what happened. So if somebody pats you on the tush or something like that.
Yeah, that happened to me when I was working in college.
Write yourself an email. On this date, boss X, slapped my butt, whatever. And just start documenting. And then you should, if it gets to the point where it's not tolerable and it can't be handled internally, you should talk to a lawyer. Generally speaking, HR is going to, in larger companies, is going to be pretty receptive to those types of complaints, but not always. I mean, it's not something employers want to deal with, and so sometimes they can trivialize these kind of complaints, and you'd think in this day and age that wouldn't happen, but it does.
Right.
It does, and I see it a lot in my police departments. Female officers are treated differently than male officers all the time. It happens very routinely. And part of it is overcoming the culture that women and men are equal in the workplace. It's a simple concept, but it's still something that needs to have some work done. So
absolutely.
So documentation, and if HR is not receptive, talk to a lawyer, and there's lots of options there after that.
Cool. And what's one piece of advice you can share with our listeners on, like, what would you tell your 20-year-old self?
Oh, well, I'd have a long conversation. But, I guess planning and foresight is really important. You know, you're not going to wake up to be the boss. You know, you have to do steps to get there. And I think that, especially in the younger people, something that is not taught in schools and is not taught in the world of common sense these days is it's not an instant gratification world. Even though, yes, we get data at our fingertips and we can do all that stuff. You have to work and get experience because experience is very valuable.
Right.
So if you work and get experience and do things with the mindset that it's not going to happen overnight, that you're going to plan, you know, I need to get 5 years of experience before I can get promoted, and if I get promoted, I can do this. Or if there's a better job offer coming along, I'm going to need experience to get there. You can't go cross the stream by swimming. It's better to have stepping stones because you'll get there with your feet dry.
Right.
So.
I love it. Great advice, Rob. Thanks so much for being on my show. For hiring leaders, to grab a download copy of my hiring guide on how to find the best talent, go to careersandcocktails.com. Job seekers, you can go there as well to find out information on where to purchase my published book called I Hate Mondays. And if you have enjoyed this video, be sure to like, subscribe, and click the bell so you don't miss an update. Cheers!
Cheers!